Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the commemoration of Ikva's 60th anniversary. My name is Edith Mecha, Communications Officer at Ikva. So before we start, we are going to share some brief technical instructions. So this event has interpretation. So you need to select your preferred language using the interpretation button below. So either Arabic, English, or French.
كما إن الترجمة متاحة باللغة العربية. من فضلك قم باختيار اللغة المفضلة لديك عن طريق نقر مفتاح الترجمة الفورية Interpretation أسفل الشاشة.
L'interprétation est disponible en français. Veuillez sélectionner votre langue préférée à l'aide du bouton Interprétation en bas de votre écran.
All right, thank you. So the event also has enabled captioning. So you should enable live captions by clicking on the live transcript button and you choose show subtitle. So to see the full caption history, you need to click on view full transcript. Yeah, and in case you encounter any issues with the platform, we are providing a video backup live stream at the URL that shows on your screen. Thank you so much.
Yes, so welcome all. My name is Ignacio. I'm with Ikva. I'm the current executive director. Age is really about how we feel, and really don't feel we're 60 as a large network of NGOs. So we are commemorating this year 60 years of advocating as a collective NGO body to improve the quality and effectiveness of humanitarian response. The Ikva at 60 conversations are taking place with a special moment today online. We have a reception later this afternoon in Geneva, but also we do have dates coming up for also to have a moment of commemoration in the different regions and offer piggybacking on other events. It is an opportunity to learn from the past and make sure the aspirations in our Ikva 2030 strategy are evolutionary, in so much that we will build upon some directions already started and are transformative, because the changes will result in an Ikva Secretariat and an Ikva network that works and feel quite different to Ikva today. Past, present, future. On this online event, we first have a conversation between three former Ikva EDs. We would be able to hear the three together from Nan, from Cyril, and from Ed. You know that the three together, they represent 32 years of Ikva executive director position. So that's more than 50% of the time of the different EDs. And it is with their legacy that my position has certainly become so rewarding and exciting. And then this will be followed by a panel discussion around the transformations of the Ikva 2030 strategy with our members from Akbar, from CARE, from Abad, from FM4 Paso Libre, and Pingo. And you will also be hearing from the perspectives of the Ikva Secretariat. And the panel is framed around the 5 transformations for the network adopted by the members in the Ikva 2030 strategy just a year ago at the General Assembly. And then we will close for today on this online conversation with a wrap up by Jane Backhurst, the chair of Ikva. So I switch back to you, Edith, and I really hope everybody enjoys this moment with us, looking at past, present, but very much looking at what's next.
Thank you so much, Ignacio, and thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us for this wonderful anniversary. So today we have the pleasure of being joined by our former 3 Ikva executive directors, So we have Mr. Cyril Rishi, who was the executive director between 1964 to 1978. And then we also have Aid Schenberg, who was also executive director from 1998 to 2012. And then we also have Nan Buzad, who was the executive director from 2013 to 2018. So today we are going to have a brief chat to know more about how Ikva came to be a global network that it is today. Now let me invite you to take a few moments down the memory lane to hear from our three great speakers. So to begin with, we start with Cyril, who was the first one. So Cyril, you became the second executive director in 1964. What was the state of the global humanitarian practices then, and how did you get involved with Ikva?
Well, congratulations to Ikva. When Ikva was created in 1962, it was the result of replacing and merging three existing NGO networks that dealt with refugees and migration. And it was therefore natural that the first act in 1962, first act of the new body, was to create a principal working organ, namely the Ikva Commission on Refugees and Migration. And I, representing one of the member organizations, was elected secretary of that new Commission on Refugees and Migration and served in that capacity until joining the Secretariat 2 years later in 1964. At that time, one of the purposes of creating Ikva was to expand NGO networking and coordination into other vital areas beyond the fundamental starting points of refugees and migration. So in due course, very early days, commissions were also created, a commission on emergency relief and a commission on economic and social development. Well, all of that's what set Ikva off on its magnificent 60-year journey, which included networking on population issues and on environmental matters. There were not existing networks of many NGOs dealing with those. The great work accomplished by Ikva in recent years and up till today makes an old-timer like me very proud of the history and of the advances over those 60 years. And in addition, the geographical and programmatic spread of today's Ikva responds most positively to a desire and an intention that was formulated from the earliest days. Congratulations on that too. I'm very much looking forward to the rest of today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. Let's now go to another start, Ed. So Ed, under your leadership, Ikva shifted its focus from development and humanitarian to purely humanitarian issues. Please, could you tell us more about that?
Thank you, Edith. Happy birthday, Ikva. It's nice to be sitting in a room which I remember as where we used to throw in some parties, and I'm very happy to see some people online who also were part of those parties. So happy birthday, Ikva, and I'm sure later today there will be a well-deserved party as well, 60 years young. Moving from development to humanitarian in the late 90s, when I came on board, was for me the obvious thing to do. Largely because, especially with the changes in the early 90s, the conflict, of course, starting with the Kurdish conflict, the conflict in the Balkans, Somalia, the Rwandan genocide, clearly humanitarian aid shifted from somewhere being an afterthought or on the sidelines of a development agenda to the center of the attention and even of the political agenda, I would say. So in that sense, trying to, it was a matter at that time of rescuing Ikva. Trying to rescue Ikva meant actually for me giving it a focus, and particularly in that sense developing it along that focus of a humanitarian focus. Important to say then, as my second point, is that in fact the humanitarian agenda was also actually quite specific. especially in those days, exactly because of the developments in the world. So we immediately had issues on our agenda as the role of the military in humanitarian aid, the protection of people in conflict, especially IDPs, internally displaced persons, but not only. Questions around standards, Nan is sitting next to me, quality and accountability. So all these sort of issues quickly really came on the agenda, and they really required NGOs to think and to develop a position in terms of, how we would answer and address those challenges. So in that sense, I would even say it was a specific humanitarian agenda. That brings me actually to my last point, because just also in recent weeks and discussing also with you, Edith, in preparing for this session, there's a number of people who said to me, well, but Ikva still has humanitarian agenda. That perception, that may be accurate or not, I'm not sure. But what is important there to mention is that obviously, especially since those days, late 90s into, of course, the first decade of the new century, the humanitarian agenda from there quickly expanded very, very rapidly and very, very largely. So it's become a huge agenda these days. So the question, as I see it for Ikva, is, of course, this is not the time and place to demarcate what is humanitarian and what's not. But I'm sure there's a question for Ikva. Do you select a number of issues on that agenda and specifically focus on those? And in fact, also raise your voice? Or do you keep it a very broad basis and a broad agenda? That, I think, is primarily a challenge you will have to address in the coming days and weeks and months ahead. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ed. Let's now go to our third fast. Nan, you are the pioneer female executive director. Briefly take us through some of the transformational innovations that grew the organization. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I think it's really important to mark these moments and to reflect, like we've just heard, not only what happened, what are the kind of the changes, but also, as Ed just, I think, really importantly put it, where does a humanitarian network go? So not an easy task, but it's very exciting. So I'm not sure I would use the words transformational innovations, since I now do innovation in a professional capacity, but I will reflect on my brief, at least briefer than the boys, tenure, some important developments that happened at Ikva. So I'll just highlight three today. So the first, and I'm going to read from my notes because we have to go very fast, so I don't want to miss anything. The first was the stabilization of the organization. Can you turn that down? You can't grow, you can't transform or innovate without a strong foundation and member confidence. This meant leveraging Ikva's very good reputation for smart and solid policy analysis, as well as being a primary forced displacement collective voice to increase multi-year financing and to increase donor and member engagement. It meant ensuring that NGOs continued to find value in a more and more competitive and fragmented world, that they would find value in their membership, and that this same value brought new and ever more diverse members to the collective table. The second point that happened was, and it was based very much on this stabilization, were the new offers that the Secretariat provided to membership. One of the most significant was the development of regional offices. And I think it had been talked about for a long time, and then it came into being. And these hubs provided, and still provide, space and structure for local and national and regional dialogues, and I think continue to deepen the exchange globally for NGOs. And the regional offices not only reflect the criticality of national and local NGOs, but as well the regional organizations. It's not just OCHA, it's not just New York and Geneva, Berlin and London, but it's the African Union, it's ASEAN, it's the League of Arab States, etc. And they all have humanitarian influence and roles. And the tenure of these Ikva regional offices seems to indicate that they are essential to the fabric of a global membership body. And here I really must note that one of my colleagues, Tanya Wood, was the leading brain and driver behind that initiative. Another part of the second development were the learning streams, such as the one on humanitarian financing, the specific initiatives such as less paper, more aid, and the coordination mechanisms. All of these provided NGO staff from around the world information and insights and clear opportunities to engage and influence not only policy, but operations and humanitarian leadership. And here, Melissa Patati and Raphael Georgiou are to be fully credited with their vision, brains, and hard work. I was asked to say a little bit about the World Humanitarian Summit. I reluctantly do so. I don't actually think it was such a great thing, but I know that it was very important and popular to many NGOs, and that it really was a watershed moment of engaging many actors around the same table and really creating a roadmap that does speak to a lot of the issues of humanitarian financing, of inclusiveness that is critical. And I must read the latest monitoring report of the World Humanitarian Summit and the Grand Bargain. To wrap up, I want to go to one last point, and that's about complementarity. I think the last year I was here, we had a general assembly, and then we had an open day, and it was about complementarity. And I remember how hard it was to make it happen. It was a lot of anxiety. What do we mean by complementarity? There's issues of different histories, of competition, of power, and vast inequities. And I thought to myself then, and I continue to think it now in the world, not just here at ICVA, not just in the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, not just in the UN, not just for governments, that we as human beings seem to be far better at competing than at coordinating. And whether that's due to different experiences or differing ideologies or fear of livelihoods or just plain ego, we too often find more that separates us than unites us. For me, ICVA's focus on collective action and its commitment to and promotion of inclusivity and humanitarian principles make it, for me, something that's not only oriented in the right direction, but it's essential for the world we live in. So I'm thrilled to be here and celebrating with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nan, for that. So we are grateful to you all for your time and perspectives. We are always happy to have you around. So please join us now for the next session, a panel discussion around the topics of the transformation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Edith, and thanks to all the former executive directors. It was really great to hear about ICVA's history and how it's evolved. And I think today we're grappling with many of those issues and conversations still. But for those who don't know me, my name's Kayasahar Chaudhary, and I'm the regional representative for ICVA in the Asia Pacific region. As somebody who just started with the organisation less than 2 years ago in the midst of COVID, listening to you reflect, I think it's real validation of what I've seen amongst the members of Ikva and the Secretariat, and that is a network that has the capacity to change and adapt to the changing context, but also stay true to its principles. And in this panel now, we're turning to look at what the future evolutions may mean for Ikva. The ICVA 2030 strategy is a reflection of what our members told us we needed as an NGO community to root us more deeply in our vision and mission for principled and effective humanitarian action. We know globally humanitarian crises such as armed conflict, forced displacement, extreme weather events, and major disease outbreaks affect more people today than any point in recorded history, and they have long-term impacts for millions of people. So for ICVA to grow and achieve its full potential, we also need to evolve and transform our network to reflect the realities in the context we work and to reach our goals and objectives in an effective and efficient manner. We refer to them, as Ignacio said, as transformations, because they're not just about small organizational tweaks, but really about the space we want to occupy to have the greatest humanitarian impact. So right now, to help us illuminate this, we have a really esteemed panel to walk us through each of the 5 transformations in the ICVA strategy. And then we'll also have some reflections from the ICVA Secretariat on how we're working towards these. We've asked each of the speakers to reflect on how they're seeing these transformations evolve in their context, looking at the past, the challenges they're currently facing, and most importantly, looking forward to say how the sector and ICVA as a network can transform for the greatest impact, affirming our collective values and being clear about what this actually looks like in practice. I'll introduce the speakers as we go through each of the transformations, and we really hope we do have some time for discussion and reflection at the end. But I really encourage you to use the chat box as a space to put any questions and comments. And for us as a community, feel free to jump in and add that find a way of feeling connected despite being on an online platform. So I'm going to go to our first speaker today to discuss the first transformation, which is on humanitarian principles and its translation into practice. And we've got Lisa K. Piper with us. Lisa is currently the director of Ikva, the agency coordinating body for Afghan relief and development. And while Lisa spent about 10 years in Afghanistan across its different phases, she has 18 years of practical experience with various NGOs across South Asia, Latin America, Caribbean, and the Middle East region. I'm going to hand over now to Lisa to share her reflections on the transformation of humanitarian principles, drawing on her very timely context in Afghanistan. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks very much, Kea. And these reflections will be looking at what things were like prior to August 15 and what they are like now with these de facto authorities. And so I have a few points to discuss based on some key questions to help guide today's discussion. So first, in looking at under this transformation and thinking about Afghanistan, what have we learned from the past and the present when working in a challenging humanitarian context? And I will say that I think many of us who are here in Afghanistan now and having worked in other challenging contexts, that we are headed for probably one of the most challenging contexts globally. So I will say that while it is never exactly the same from country to country when a big event happens, there are challenges from other countries that are experiencing or have experienced similar upheavals to here. And they can be accurate predictors of how challenges in a humanitarian context may evolve. And by evolve, I mean grow and expand and get stronger. And so in thinking about Afghanistan and what we have seen since August 15 and the nearly complete takeover, we can see that there are similarities. It's not exactly the same, but similarities from other countries, such as Yemen, Syria, Sudan, and most likely others. And I will say also that challenges that NGOs are experiencing in the humanitarian context, they don't necessarily go away when a government changes. And so by that, I mean that in Afghanistan, many of us were discussing prior to August 15, that most likely the trajectory for NGOs in Afghanistan was one where they would be forced to close because the operating environment was becoming ever more restrictive under the previous administration. Now, after August 15, there were months of confusion, and it was a little bit easier to work, but many of us here in country would agree that at this point, many of those same challenges, they remain the same. And that can be for different reasons. There are certain structures that were already set up. We see people who were in the former administration, they're back in this administration. And so they continue on. And so as many of you probably know, Afghanistan was one of the case studies last year on bureaucratic access impediments. And that case study would still be quite relevant today. So continuing on, if we think about red flags that we've had to navigate, what could we do differently in the future? I would say that following humanitarian principles in general can become quite divisive. And this is not only between the UN and NGOs, there's always some regular tension, but We've seen that increase here in Afghanistan, but even among NGOs themselves. And so I would say that agencies can sometimes get confused in terms of what they mean, and by they, I mean principles or operating principles, what they mean, how you discuss them with authorities, with external actors. And at times we've seen confusion where there are agencies that understand that there is supposed to be an all or nothing type of approach when that's not necessarily the case. And that only furthers the divisiveness. So it's really important to try to have common positions among NGOs. What are core red lines? How do we support one another in adhering to these red lines? And this should happen in country as well as regionally and globally. It's also really important that agencies in country have the support of their regional offices and their headquarters, and that the support coming from those offices is experienced in complex humanitarian settings. Now, thinking about Ikva and transforming the way we work to be better prepared, evolve for the future, what can Ikva do to better support NGOs? Akbar and Ikva, we've had a number of conversations about this over the months. And so we have some plans in place, as well as we have started some actions. And it's really a follow-on to what some of the red flags were, which is facilitating a dialogue and common positions and messaging around those positions, around how can we adhere to humanitarian principles? How can we really put people front and center, our accountability to affected people? How do we really live and breathe localization rather than it just being language? So one of the things is we often joke around that de facto authorities or armed groups have a common playbook. But there are examples where different groups have been talking and learning from one another. And I'll give the example, a recent example of the Ministry of Public Health here asking the health cluster, why is it not co-leading the health cluster? Because the Houthis are doing so in Yemen. It was pretty well known in Yemen, the Houthis had received some training from Sudan. So if they can talk and learn from one another, we should be doing the same. And so I will say ICVA's already started this for Afghanistan. We have started some conversations with NGOs in country and the regional offices and headquarters and around common positioning. And we've agreed to have a series of discussions around this. There is a need to, for example, discuss how can we have common advocacy and messages around such a thing as the frozen assets in Afghanistan? Do we advocate for that or not? And that's just one example of where ICVA can facilitate that dialogue as we look to the future and hopefully work better together. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lisa, for that clear overview. And I think really highlighted that recommendation for ICVA in our convening and facilitating role, where it's to learn not just from the past, but from each other. And with this network that we have of expertise, that's something that we can really bring forward. And I think, the important message too of why is principled humanitarian action a transformation when this has been ICVA's, goal from the beginning, is that we can't take it for granted and that there is need to be having discussions on how this works in practice and how we uphold the principles. So thanks very much for your insights into that, Lisa. So we're going to go to our second transformation now. And so to talk about climate change and its impact in humanitarian action, we have Bala Musa Sidibe with us, the Regional Director of Care International at West Africa. Bala Musso has more than 20 years of experience in both development and humanitarian aid in the private sector. His previous and current roles is overseeing more than 13 country programs in various thematic areas, including climate justice and adaptation. Over to you, Bala.
Thanks so much, Kia, and hello, everyone. I'm really pleased today to speak to all of you and to send you my warm greetings from Bamako, Mali, where I am at the moment in West Africa, particularly in the Sahel sub-region, which is a place in the world that is warming. It's important to note it, 1 to 2 more times, depending on the years, than the rest of the world. And obviously, this has alarming consequences like population displacements, illegal migrations, conflicts, violent radicalism we are seeing for the past years now, among others. As a citizen from the Sahel myself, and as regional director of CARE International for West Africa, the commemorations of Ikva 60th anniversary offers me a unique opportunity to speak to you today about how the climate change and social inequalities, particularly gender inequality, are significantly increasing the vulnerability of vast majority of West Africans, especially women and girls in the Sahel and around the Lac Chad Basin. It's opportune for me now to mention that since the early 70s, climate shocks and chronic severe droughts have been affecting the Sahel countries, including the Lac Chad Basin, leading to insufficient access to potable water, limited viability of agriculture and pastoralism as sustainable livelihoods, and severe food insecurity. Talking about food insecurity and talking about this year, we were talking about close to 30 million people that are expected to face severe food insecurity just this year. And according to OCHA data, compared to last year, 2021, we should expect an increase of more than 40% in the number of people facing severe food insecurity during the next lean season this year. So that's to present the magnitude of the issues we have here. Furthermore, the governance challenges in many of our countries, combined with the inadequate level of basic services and sustainable livelihoods opportunities provision to the vast majority of the population, gradually led to issues like illegal migration, traffics of drugs, weapons, etc., violent radicalism, and conflicts that are today threatening the existence of many Sahel countries. After recalling this situation, it appears to me important to now highlight some of the core actions that CARE International and its partners are focusing on to address these complex issues with a particular focus on gender. To start, I will mention here that with many other organizations, CARE signed the locally led adaptation action principles in order to address the threats of climate change and social inequalities. And based on our experience in implementing different programs, sometimes successful, sometimes more mitigated, but we have some experience that were focused on the support, particularly on women and young pastoralists in the Sahel, with the aim to familiarize them with digital technology, climate adaptation, agriculture techniques, solar use, and various more modern technology. And out of that, and an example is the Partners for Resilience program, the REDAP program, which were across different Sahel countries, we could find that promoting community-based adaptation and locally led adaptation for some time now, we could say that it helps communities to strengthen their leadership and understanding of governance process, as well as their knowledge of climate risk and adaptation solutions. For us at CARE International, being inclusive is in our collective response to climate change is crucial and means that gender inequality is the reason why women and girls are differently and disproportionately affected by climate change, as much as they are also most at risk of hunger and subjected to gender-based violence. Thus, for us, building climate resilience and responding to climate risk cannot be done without being inclusive, without more than half of the affected population that women and girls are representing, and they need to be at the table. Without tackling the various gender barriers they face, I don't think we will not do anything very sustainable. Finally, by empowering women and girls through inclusion in research and analysis, education, accessing climate resilience building tools, and in relevant decision-making spaces, these women and girls will be able to contribute to solutions that work better for them, but also for the wider community. All that said, at CARE International, we are also convinced that women and girls focused policies matters, because despite the focus on women on some of our programs I mentioned earlier, we still have to know that 47% of adaptation projects still not integrate gender. The needs and the strengths of women and girls must be systematically considered in climate projects and more broadly in all humanitarian programs to ensure a comprehensive and sustainable response that increases the resilience of all populations. Gender transformative climate resilience, emergency preparedness, and anticipatory action models already exist in many of our organizations. While there is always room for improvement, such models and creating new and better ones too, it's high time for all of us to concentrate on urgently scaling up tested and proven models to reach a great number of people facing climate risks today. As signatories organization of the Humanitarian Charter on Climate and Environment, I will really like to appeal to our responsibility to work together to reduce the impact of the crisis and to urge all actors in the humanitarian sector and beyond to do the same. And especially today, I would like to also talk about the donor community that is currently facing competing priorities in the world. Understanding that we exist to serve the vulnerable ones should lead to greater collaboration, to amplify our efforts and to address together what is probably the greatest challenge of our time. We know that a profound transformation is needed. We are already acting for this, and we are determined to go further. To end today, I hope to send a strong and clear signal about the essential role that humanitarian organizations have to play in addressing the impact of the climate crisis. Let's listen to the women. Let's be more local and inclusive. Let's be determined to amplify our advocacy for a sustainable climate change response. Thank you so much for your attention, and I wish a happy 60th anniversary to Ikva that is really crucial to help us do all this work together. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Baran, and highlighting that urgent call on climate and humanitarian action. And I think put a real face to it, talking about the impact that the drought is having on those that are most marginalized, and the need for us not to look at these issues in silos when we talk about climate, when we talk about gender transformation, and looking at how they intersect and affect the most marginalized for effective humanitarian action. So thank you very much for your contributions and some of the programs as well that you were mentioning. For our third transformation on the value we all bring due to our proximity to people in crisis, we have with us today Gaida Anani, founder and director of ABAD, the Resource Center for Gender and Equality. Gaida, based in Lebanon, is the founder and director of ABAD, a leading CSO in the region, advocating for gender equality, women's rights, and the political participation of women. In 2018, Gaida was listed by the World Bank as one of the 10 inspiring women entrepreneurs making a difference across MENA. And in 2019, she was selected by the UN Solutions Summit Committee as one of those 10. So over to you, Gaida, to share your reflections.
Thank you so much. And we really value the space and opportunity. And honestly, for us being part of Ikva throughout these years, especially located in this side of the world, in the MENA region, in such a unique context like Lebanon, where we all struggle with a very complex system and structure at the same time, where we kind of connected but also isolated from all what's going on when it comes to advancing gender equality around the globe. So Ikva is always like a kind of space that allow us all not only to reflect, but also to come together with learning and allow us to exchange on good practices and exposure to whatever is new and different opportunities that allow us as activists working on feminist agenda and countering gender-based violence and advancing gender equality to momentums and opportunity. And also the most important, I have to say, is how we transform the needs of the people on the ground, keep the tie and keep the voice of the people on the ground, but also to evidence-based interventions, approaches, and also literature. Bridging that divide between academia and activism was quite essential for us in our work in trying to reduce gender-based violence in Lebanon. At a time of peace, if we can ever call it peace in a country where we operate, but also a time of challenges, a time of crisis, where we actually try to ensure that people stay at the heart of what we're doing, and also try actually to translate their daily struggle, especially women and girls being the most affected in any humanitarian crisis, trying to translate their daily challenges under the confessional system, under the personal status code, under the legislative framework, into really strategies for policy reform, and also keeping like the priority in the forefront. One of our, I have to say, biggest learning throughout these years, and especially throughout the last year, where we really faced much of challenges with the economic crisis, the banking collapse, the banking system collapse, and the pandemic, where everyone knows that the most affected usually by these kind of crises are women and girls, and the ratio of and the rate of increase of gender-based violence was really alarming and on the rise. However, no matter what, like keeping really that life-saving services were at the forefront, this is where as ABAD, we tried really through also connecting with all Ikva members, through being part and co-leading on the Generation Equality, the Action Coalition on GBV, alongside with UN Women being part of the call to action. The most important for us was keeping really the priority and keeping the discourse around ending gender-based violence as one of the essential issues to keep as a protection concern over any humanitarian crisis. You know, usually when we're hit by a natural disaster, crisis, war, usually livelihood, health come at the forefront, of course. However, keeping the protection of people, especially the most vulnerable, like women, girls, but also elderlies and LGBT groups, refugees, those that are stateless, usually are really left behind in any kind of planning. And despite the fact that their protection concern are the most affected. And with adding to that an economic crisis, you can imagine how the financial planning of the country is being managed.
heading into election. We just completed our election this weekend with the vacuum. So all the resources that can be available for keeping, no matter what, the life-saving services operating for women was really at stake. Funding for the country when it comes to its prioritization was at stake. And here we're really keeping connection between the local and keep the voice of people really loud in translating what's going on and connecting that to the regional discourse with other women organizations and in the lobbying, and also keeping that connected to global policy platforms where decisions around where the money can go, women are accounted for. So we really value Ikva as platform to keep that. And if one thing we would like Ikva to continue doing at this moment is really bringing people together, especially those that are working with the people in life saving threatening, to really do the reflection and learning on possible amendment of different tactics that can be good practices at time of crisis, especially in such unique context. So happy birthday, Ikva, and we really look forward to continue being part of such an amazing platform and connected to all activists around the globe. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Gaida. I think you really highlighted the value organizations like yourselves bring to the network in being so within and based in the community and understanding those protection concerns, but then linking and translating that into the regional policy and the global policy discussions. And again, that recommendation for us to keep fostering exchange and learning amongst colleagues. So thank you very much for that. So we're going on to our fourth transformation now, which is on being diverse, inclusive, and living our values. And we have with us Enrique Gonzalez Araiza, the Executive Director of FM Cuatro. He is a member of Ikva board and a professor of the International Law and Human Rights. Over to you, Enrique.
Hi, thank you, Kay, for the opportunity. I prepared a small intervention to express some points. So I'm gonna start. Dignidad y Justicia en el Camino, better known as FM4 Paso Libre, is a small NGO that provides humanitarian assistance to migrants and refugees based in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, the western part of the country. The heart of our organization is a shelter where we provide comprehensive care for people in the context of human mobility. We are one of the hundreds of organizations and group of people that believes in this radical that migrants and refugees should have their human rights guaranteed. However, we must recognize that in our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, there's a great diversity of organizations that serve this population with different privilege and capabilities. They are organizations and group of people that function from the will of their members with limited access to financial and human resources, while some others have average access to resources, and little by little, we have expanded work by linking with local, national, as in the case of our local NGO, the international networks. This has to do with the capabilities, budget, and strategic that each actor has. For example, in Mexico, humanitarian attention to migrants and refugees in the northern or southern border city is not the same at the center or the west. Having governmental or ecclesiastical support is not the same as being insulated from these actors. In the same way that being connected in regional global discussion is not the same, it's not being part of the dialogue. In this sense, it seems important and relevant to me that within the local organization that we are beginning to have access to these spaces with the scope of humanitarian aid, the humanitarian principles, the strategies to follow the way forward are discussed. discussed, among other topics. We can articulate and join work with those organizations that, due to their limitation in time, capacities, human research, and why not say even the interesting of sharing the table in these discussions. So how to generate interest in the local organization so they join these international networks such as Ikva. As a part of Ikva's 2030 strategy, action points have been established, such as the establishment of a global network of members that is more diverse and rooted in the regions and the countries affected by multiple humanitarian crises. The foregoing to bet on a governance model that reflects the diversity of the members and is based on the value they contribute through inclusive, equitable, and supportive process that leave not one behind. By including local organizations, we guarantee a diverse space that amplifies the voice of those who have been left out of key discussion in humanitarian actions, strategic discussions on coordination, financing, among others, which are the key to ensuring that humanitarian action is effective and efficient. From our experience as local organization, if we are not part of the network like Ikva, our actions at advocacy at the regional and international level will be limited or largely absent. As member of Ikva, we have been able to place point in the global discussion, and the other collaborative work spaces have not materialized or have been diluted due to the lack of capabilities. We know that there are challenges, but we believe that the gain is greater and the places the people we serve at the center. In the relation to above, putting people at the center, and the center is central point that unifies the efforts to humanitarian actors. Is finally a way to encourage local organizations from the various regions and speaking particularly of my experience of Latin America to form part of the network with a proven and established strategical approach for the joint mobilization of resources between those who support the obtain of resources from local organizations and coalitions. And I'm so happy to be here, and congratulations and happy birthday, Ikva.
Thank you so much, Enrique. And I think, you speak so much to the diversity that it has to be within our structures as well, and how we walk the talk in a sense. And I think the value of having access to these spaces is critical, and that there's more to be done in this area to make sure that the voices of local organizations are included in Ikva's work moving forward and in the spaces that we have the privilege and access to be in. Thank you, Enrique. So for our fifth transformation, we will now go to Samir Dowdy, who's the policy advisor at the Palestinian NGO network, PINGO, for his reflections around transformation on collaborative advantage to increase our impact and partnerships and how we build on those. Over to you, Samir.
Thank you so much. Thanks for Ikva for having me. I mean, this is a great day to be part of this. I was very inspired in the introduction of saying various EDs speak on various experiences and building on this 60 years of work to our joint collaboration and achieving our joint goals. When we talk about impact and when we talk about humanitarian development and peace and how we want to do things, I mean, the biggest takeaway is not reinventing the wheel. It's building on previous work, being strategic. It's looking at different perspectives, like Geda and Lewis, and they talk about it from different perspectives. One pushes for gender, other on climate, shelter. It's bringing people together in one meeting. It's not just one meeting. It's really continuing the dialogue, and Ikva does a lot of that work when it comes to strategic engagement with various stakeholders, whether it's donors, INGOs, UN agencies, civil societies. I mean, from us, we're an umbrella for 140 organizations. We have humanitarian development and human rights organizations with various mandates and various priorities. And one thing that we try to do is to do that, focus on coordination. And then I think the biggest thing is to have policy direction on one component. So all these policy advisors or working on priorities come in on and sit on the table. The advocacy component, maybe that would be one of the opportunities for Ikva to work on, other than the extremely important work that they do. From a program operational, I mean, that's something that Ikva is doing, and with other partners like HQAI and others, to see how we can improve our program work as civil society or humanitarian organizations or development organizations. From an operational standpoint, we're pushing back against shrinking space, and that would be another priority that needs to be on the table, because although we're doing a lot of work, things are regressing in terms of shrinking space and in terms of the challenges, and there's opportunities, but we can learn from each other once we sit on the table and speak. Another thing would be the finance mechanism. We've talked about that a little bit and that's something that the NGO Fora through Ikva was a successful program that was able to support a lot of the NGOs, maybe short term. Maybe we need to do something longer term. And then ideally, it's something that we can take on and work on together would be a triple nexus funding mechanism. So we can bring in the various actors in a multi-year dimension with various priorities, and then take it step by step. So we have the inclusion factor, and then we have the ownership of various stakeholders saying, this is something I participated in, this is something I will keep pushing for, I'll put my differences aside, and I will work on having a better impact. And then one thing I wanted to mention, from the first intervention on humanitarian principles. Humanitarian principles are good, and when you meet with various stakeholders, we as Pingo, we are engaged with donors, we're engaged with civil society organizations. When you talk to humanitarian, they're so focused on meeting the most vulnerable needs, and then they kind of have it a narrow direction. This is my mandate. This is what I want to work on. Having other stakeholders on the table engaged can actually be useful, that we also meet other people's needs that might be at risk or of becoming vulnerable. So in parallel of addressing the most vulnerable needs, we are saying we are being preventive, we are taking preemptive steps, we are planning and we're working strategically based on the priorities of local stakeholders. And maybe the last component with bringing it all together is localization. The localization and the principles of partnership. I've brought up multiple things that are in the impact where it all comes in together. The principles of partnership, looking at Ikva's work maybe since 2006 and maybe before that, we had organizations sign on the principles of partnership. And then later on in 2017, I saw an updated version where other organizations also joined the principles of partnership. This is something, an opportunity to have other organizations, networks, even donors, because I don't see donors signing this, that can push for principles of partnership, can push for more equality, can push for transparency, having a result-based approach, responsibility, complementarity. This can bring all our priorities come together where we can have a better impact on the ground. Thank you. I'll leave it at this.
Thanks so much, Samir. And I think your last point nicely went to your first point, which was around not reinventing the wheel. And we have the principles of partnership, but it's looking at how do you put that in practice, and making sure we're providing more. We're not forgetting that, and we're pushing that forward in our discussions with donors and other actors and building on the networks that we have. And Ikva has this extensive network, as you've all demonstrated in this discussion, that we should be drawing on the expertise that we have and coming together for this collective action. So thank you. We have one more speaker, but I want to say to everyone, we will have about, it looks like 20 minutes or just under for discussion. So please do feel free to put your comments and reflections in the chat. The speakers that we've had so far have been just very, very kind in kind of kicking off the discussion and giving us some food for thought. And we'd like to hear from you on ideas you had on anything that's been shared, or your experiences in this. So we'll go to our last speaker and also give you some thinking time as well for that. So lastly, but not least, we have Mirella, who is the Director of Humanitarian Policy at Ikva, and Mirella, sitting next to me, where she leads our policy team focusing on forced migration, humanitarian financing and coordination. Mirella's have 15 years of professional experience in human rights, migration and refugee law, working both at NGOs and UN agencies. And we've asked Mirella to reflect a little bit from the Secretariat position of where we're at with the transformations and the things that she's heard today. So over to you, Mirella.
Thank you so much, Kea. And let me please start by saying how privileged I feel to be today here with all the members of Ikva, with the former leadership of Ikva, with members of the board, and also with former staff of Ikva. And I would like to thank you all for the support and for the great work that you have done for Ikva in all these 60 years, and also to really assure you that the Secretariat team is really committed to keep up this good work. So thank you very much. Now for the transformations, as recognized in the Ikva 2030 strategy, I think we heard from the different speakers about the relevance for the future of our network, and not only for the network of Ikva, but also for the sector itself. And as a Secretariat, I think for us it's crucial, as you also mentioned at a certain point, Kea, to walk the talk. So since the Ikva 2030 strategy was adopted last year, the Secretariat stepped up its efforts on all the transformation. And I'm speaking about stepping up efforts because, as we heard also from Nan, Cyril, and Ed, these transformations have in fact been there present, and they have been driving the work of the organization throughout its history. But today I wanted just to share a bit with you about what we think we are achieving so far and what we are experiencing as challenges regarding the transformation, and looking at it strictly from a Secretariat perspective, because members spoke more generally about how they relate to the work of the network. So in terms of successes, I would say that from a Secretariat perspective, I think we are progressing well in terms of diversity and inclusion, as well as in terms of collaborative advantage. When it comes to collaborative advantage, because of its nature, Ikva continues, in my view, to score high in building partnerships and working with others. I think Ikva is quite strategic in its partnerships, choosing for complementarity. Nan mentioned it from the very beginning, that it has not always been easy, but it has been a focus of Ikva work. And we focus for partnership that enable us to deliver in our common objective for improving the services and the situation of the people we work with on the ground. In the last years, in addition to all this work that have been going on for 60 years, I would say, we have tried to further formalize and structure most of the partnerships, as well as to extend and strengthen the regional partnerships. And in the future, I think we should continue to invest further in the regional partnerships, because that's where we are also more near to the people we work with. Now, the second area where I think we are scoring quite well is diversity and inclusion within the Secretariat team itself. I think the Secretariat team has grown both in terms of numbers, but also its diversity. And I hope the colleagues will all agree with me, but I think we all consider this diversity as a strength. And we have today a secretariat which has a strong collaborative structure, and the views and opinions of all the members of the team I listen to by the senior management of the organization, but also by the board, that is strongly emphasizing on this diversity and inclusion. Now, in terms of challenges, and of course there are many of them, it will take me ages, and I wish I had the time to go more in depth on these challenges and discuss really with you, have your point of view also in terms of what we can do about it. But I would highlight two of them right now. The first one is the accountability to people affected by crisis. And the second one, in my view, is respect for the humanitarian principles. Now, about accountability to people affected by crisis. I think because of its nature again, Ikva Secretariat is not directly in contact with the concerned populations. The Secretariat can and should not replace members and partners in reaching out to people affected by crisis and getting very, very various views and aspirations on what needs to be done to improve a situation. However, I think that while members and partners remain in the front line, as a Secretariat, we can and should do better to support you in this work, to support you in reaching out to the affected people and in reflecting their voices, their aspirations in the joint advocacy work that we do. And I also think that we can do more to listen to all of you, including those of you that can speak timidly or that are less inclined to speak out all the time. And I think this was also some of the messages that I heard from Fiona, for example, in the chat box that were speaking about the regional, investing further in the regional offices, but also Enrique when he spoke about the voices of the local NGOs and how they are represented in the Ikva work. I think this is very important for Ikva to continue to be funded in the humanitarian principles. And again, for me, considering today's reality, this is an area where we all face so many challenges. We heard Samer speaking about some of them. We heard Lisa speaking about the challenges that NGOs face in a situation like Afghanistan. So I think as a Secretariat, we should do better to help the members navigate these not white and black situations. And it is important that we really position well the Secretariat, not as the one bringing the solutions, because it's not our role, we don't have a mandate, we don't have the expertise on that, but we are there to promote the exchanges between you, to encourage and facilitate you listening to each other, and what is more important in my view, also to listen to the people concerned, because very often the solutions come from them. So these are just few ideas that I wanted to share with you today, and glad also to hear from your feedback and any questions you might have. And thanks again. Over to you, Kea.
Thank you so much, Marilla. That's a good segue into our next part, which is opening the floor to yourselves as members, supporters, partners that have worked with Ikva. If you have any questions for either of the panels, we did get a chance to do Q&A after the executive director shared, but also the transformations panel that we just had. the floor is yours now, and feel free. I see some in French, and while I don't speak French, we have colleagues who do. So if you would like to put your questions in, feel free. And some had already started to comment, so I don't know if Fiona or Benori wanted to come in with some of the points that were there in the chat. Oh, okay, sorry. Thanks, Marcus. Marcus has said, Mamadou Nadaya, sorry if I'm pronouncing poorly, would like to take the floor. Over to you, Mamadou.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be with you. As a former board member, I will say hello to everyone, and it's a pleasure. I'm sorry I can't be here for the drink this evening because I took it very late. So just a few points. First of all, congratulations for the work done in this long way. Special congratulations for the diversity and decentralization. These are two very important points that I wanted also to see continuing, as it is said by other speakers. The other point is we took a new challenge as Ikva, and I can just say that I was a board member for at least 14 years in Ikva. So I have a little idea maybe on that. Transformation is critical. And again, the question first is to the members, are we ready to make drastic and significant change in our work, our way of doing business? This is a big, important question that we need to look at. The second is, can we scale up? This is to all of us, scale up the networking. I mean, networks putting together their work and working together to achieve more goal, because the role of network is really critical at this time. They are our voices, and if we are not behind them, if we don't support, if the networks don't work together or advocate together, we will be having still problems. The other point is, if we are ready to make these changes, what do we need? We need structured academia participation. We need structured thinkers participation. These are two elements that we can't avoid now because they are critical. We can't be in the middle of the business every day and having a right analysis of the situation, of complex situation that we are living in. So I think it will be interesting to look on those areas if we want to make lasting change and achieve the transformation we wanted to have. And again, I just think that these are some elements I can bring in, and I would like to say hello to everybody I saw on the I know and I don't know, and special thank also for all the EDs. It's a pleasure to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, important points about the different types of partnerships we need to bring in. Does anyone want to take some of the comments there from Mahmoud?
I can say something real quick. I mean, thanks for the intervention. I mean, the biggest thing is, are we willing, like you said, are we willing to change? Are we willing to step away from our comfort zone and move towards the future and having this transformative way of work? I think the answer should be yes, and it has to be yes, because if we don't, things are not going to stay put the way it is. Worldwide, we have we were seeing more humanitarian man-made crisis. I mean, similar to what's happening in Palestine with occupation, with various violations, and it's made humanitarian. And that's why I think the triple nexus is the one approach that we should take very seriously when we have the politicians come in and play their role in preventing such crisis, I don't like to call it crisis, but prevent violations from taking place. So that doesn't fall into our plate of work in providing humanitarian aid. This way I can go into various priorities where I need to be involved, and instead of creating more work for humanitarians and expect them to solve this, or be working in such a context for over 74 years of Nakba and over 50 years of occupation. So the answer in very short should be yes. And one solution is to have various stakeholders take on their responsibilities, whether it's states, whether it's donors, whether it's civil society organizations, NGOs collectively, and put an end to various violations and move forward to collective and needed work where it needs to be done. Over.
Thanks so much, Samia. Okay, I'm going to hand over, I think, very important points there. We've got Cyril as well with their hand up. If you wanted to go share your reflection, Cyril, thanks.
Yes, hello. As undoubtedly the oldest person on screen and in the room and around, and someone who was on the founding, I want to say that everything I've heard today has been extremely stimulating, and I congratulate all the speakers in the panel on the very thoughtful presentations and remarks. There's something that just comes across very clearly is the diversity of this community. And remember, our diversity is both a strength and a weakness. It's a strength because we can bring together extraordinary amounts of experiences and get better results. But it's a weakness if we don't do that. It's probably unknown to anybody else on this panel, on this call, that Ikva produced a paper called Making Common Cause Internationally. I think it was around about the 1980s. And the title was wonderful because it was intended to show that we have things in common. We must look outside our silos and we must bring in a multiplicity of experiences. And what I've heard today shows that today's Ikva is doing that. One of the most important sentences in that document was that what unites us is more important than what divides us. And that seems to me to be still inspiring the Ikva of today. I was very happy, although not with the subject, happy to note that I think it was somewhere mentioned the current shrinking space for NGOs in general, for the media, for justice, indeed. And we have to stand together. It's only if we stand together that we have the slightest hope of combating this tendency in now more than 100 governments to shrink the space for our work, which is so essential to democracy and human rights and the rule of law. So thanks to everybody who's made a contribution. And I'm already looking forward to the 70th anniversary.
Thank you so much, Cyril. Very valuable words. And I think this, we have to continue. And I think as every speaker highlighted, making our diversity our strength and working towards how we do that kind of collectively. We do have a comment, I guess, that is also reflecting in the chat, challenging it. I don't know, Meryl, if you want to take a look at this, but saying that, it sounds like from the panel discussion that we're at the risk of being pulled in all kinds of directions. And I think one of the former EDs we heard from, Ed, spoke about getting lost. And is Ikva once again at the risk of repeating history if we spread ourselves too thinly, as was highlighted in one of Ikva's papers? So Marilla, do you want to have a crack at this one? I know it's a discussion we had.
Yes, thank you, Kay, and thank you to the person who put that comment on the chat box, because indeed it is a risk, not only to Ikva, but to all the organizations. And I think on the other hand, we have also to keep in mind that the situation today is quite complex. They are not easy found solution. We have to take this broad view when we come up with solutions, or we have to bring into the discussion different voices, different interests at stake, different perspectives. I think as long as we are clear in our role, in our mandate, we somehow protect itself into not getting lost. And I think it's also very important to keep in mind what is the final aim that we have through this process, what do we want to reach. And I think all the sector has learned a lot from the past, also in terms of better structuring our work. I would say that maybe today it's a bit overstructured. We have to fill in too many law frames, too many theories of change. But on the other hand, these tools do also help us not to get lost and to always remain result-oriented. But the risk is there, and colleagues always discuss openly about that, which I think is also a good sign that we are aware of that risk and we pay attention to that. So yeah, that's what I can share. But also maybe if I can also answer some of the other comments that I see on the chat box, because they are actually into the Q&A chat box. There are also some questions about localization and being more near to the regional context, the issue of Ikva being more open to communicate in different languages. And these are all very correct suggestions and elements that we are already considering, knowing that, of course, we can and should do much better in all these areas. But for sure, this remains some of our priorities in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mirella. I can see we're at time, and we'll maybe move to wrap up if there aren't any burning questions. Marcus, please do come in if I've missed a hand or anything at this stage.
All seems clear. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. But just maybe I'll hand over to Mirella next. So, yes, but just a huge thank you to everyone. I think as both Mirella and Cyril said, such enriching discussions as always when we're bringing members together. So over to you, Mirella.
Kia, thank you very much. I have the great honor and privilege. I think we had a good discussion with the chat, with the panel, but I have now the great honor and the privilege to hand it over to Jane Buckhurst, who is the Ikva board chair. And you know her for being active with Ikva for many years, even before being chair of the board. And Jane, I hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mirella, and thank you for everyone who's contributed to today, and especially all the panelists and our members online. Anniversaries are moments of celebration, and this is our 60th anniversary. Despite the very challenging environment, as a network, we have a lot to celebrate. In these 60 years, Ikva has proven to be an efficient and resilient network, and that's been attested by various impact studies we've done over the years, and indeed reports that have been highlighted by former executive directors and their secretariats here today. Throughout these 60 years, with our agility, we have successfully confronted the various challenges as much as we possibly can, working closely with each other and counting on the support of our partners. This anniversary testifies to the added value of our network, and we should really be proud of it. Our strength today remains in our diversity. While growing, we remain united and continue to invest collectively in our values for principles and efficient humanitarian intervention. And I really want to say thank you to all of you for the joint efforts and the successes reached throughout the years. And anniversaries are also moments of reflection for the future. As it was mentioned by almost all of our panelists, the environment today is increasingly challenging. The board is therefore working even closer with the Secretariat and the membership to steer Ikva's work in this challenging environment. In its remaining mandate over the next 2 years, this current board is particularly emphasising diversity, equity and inclusion inside the board, inside the membership and across our network, and also, as has been reflected, by Mirella within the Secretariat and Ignacio. But this would ensure that all members can equally contribute to its work and equally benefit to it, regardless of whether they are small or large organisations, national or international ones. We are looking at the Ikva governance structures and how we further support a strong Ikva Secretariat, enabled to listen and assist all of you and the people we all work with. For us, every voice counts, and putting enhanced effort to listen together and advocate with and for the voices on the front line is absolutely imperative for this. With the Ikva 2030 strategy and its transformations, I think we do have the right tools to move in this direction. But the tools and the commitment of the board alone are really not enough. What we need is to really employ that network, employ that legacy, employ that skills and experience. We need active investments from each and every one of our members and partners. And today I feel really confident with the board that we all have the needed commitment, the commitment to invest further in collective work and impact, so that in the years to come, we can continue to improve delivery of our mandate in a more principled and efficient way for the people we work with and leaving no one behind. Thank you to PHAP for the technical support and the interpreters. And thank you again for today's reflections and inspiration, Lisa, Bala, Gida, Kike, Samer, and Mirella, highlighting just how much we really do have to celebrate. And thank you to Cyril, Ed, Nan, for your leadership and pivotal contributions over the decades with your secretariats, and to ICVA's current executive director, Ignacio, and the whole team. Thank you for continuing that legacy and ensuring we adapt with ICVA 2030. Thank you finally to everybody online, our members. We are really so looking forward to continue our collective impact. Happy 60th birthday, everyone.